Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Melbourne Athletic Development Podcast. Today we are extremely lucky to be joined by Dr. David Woods. David, if you could be kind enough to tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Thank you.
You're not allowed to check your notes, though.
John.
Absolutely not.
Jack. Well, look, it's so confusing what I do these days. People, kind of go into a swirl when I start talking about it. So,
Well, what do you think you do?
Well, I know what I earn a living doing, which is making theatre. That's my main kind of activity.
When you say making theatre, are you a carpenter?
Well, again, you see the confusion just swirls. But sometimes, I am a carpenter. I'm a van driver. I'm a bolt fixer. I'm a light focuser. I'm a sound designer. I'm an editor. But if you were to go to the traditional roles, it is I write plays. They get published eventually. I direct the play, and I also act in the play.
So you are from go to woe,
The whole
very
thing.
heavily involved in the production, particularly of theatre.
Yeah, and then I'll externally to that. So that's really what I do as my own company, Ridiculousness, which has been going for 34 years as a double act.
Where did the name come from?
It comes from Horace's epistle, Parturient montes nascetur ridiculousmus, which means mountains heave in childbirth and a ridiculous mouse is born. There you go. Well, you asked. So, it means, big things can be expressed in light ways, which is become a sort of bit of a motto for that work that I do with Jonathan Haynes, Dr. Jonathan Haynes.
We say doctor. What are you a doctor of?
So both John and I, we were feeling after about 16 years of practice that we weren't sort of in the literature. The body of work was just being eaten and forgotten. And so we both signed up for, firstly, masters at University of Kent when this wave of practice-based research was emerging in the sector, and enjoyed it so much we continued on to do PhDs.
And what specifically was your PhD on?
So my thesis was called How to Be Funny.
I feel like it's a very, very clever topic. Can you explain what you found, and can you explain a little bit about what it does take to be funny?
And the other thing actually too, I think of, when I think of theatre, I don't think of research. I think of, that purely related to the arts and creativity, which is not necessarily something that you intellectualize, but it's interesting to consider that in that particular field, because I think of within our field, we obviously are always considering research and how it influences what we do. I feel like in the arts, that's almost the opposite, but I guess you've looked at trying to merge those two worlds.
Yeah, I think, I have almost sort of physically merged those two worlds now that I've gone into psychology as well.
We'll get to that.
Yeah, but we'll
You're
get
a busy
onto
person.
that. But to say, I don't know where to take this one first, but, well, what's How to Be Funny? Do you want to know that one quickly? Well, we can just, riff that off. Or you can watch my sermon online. Where
did we find that, actually? You did mention that.
School of Life Melbourne did a series of secular sermons. And so I was commissioned to do one on humour. John Safran's in there as well, doing some voodoo thing on the rooftop at dawn.
What happened to that bloke?
I think he's still doing voodoo things on rooftops at dawn.
I feel like he's disappeared off the face of the earth.
I don't kind of follow him. So, but it was great to have that opportunity to sort of just take the research and the academic work into a sort of more, accessible plain language form. But essentially that was about looking at humour theory and whether you can sort of just learn the theories and then apply them in practice. The theories being, or the groups of theories being that humour is all about superiority, coming from Plato and so on. The second group being about humour being about incongruity, which is Schopenhauer, Kant, people like that. And the third group, being really driven by Freud's sense of humour being a relief about taboo subjects. We just talk about something taboo, and people will laugh. And really, I sort of say quite early on that this is not a study of laughter, but that is your measurement of whether something is comedy or not.
We spoke about this the other day. So you mentioned that clearly things like superiority are not well accepted these days as a form of comedy, you know, putting other people down or showing that, for instance, you know, one group is superior to another. But you mentioned in that discussion that exact point that you made, that comedy, really the only way to assess its value is based on whether somebody laughs. How do you think, because that to me is an incongruence, because it doesn't matter what is said if someone or a group of people find it funny. You're allowed to get yourself in trouble here because we don't have that many listeners, so you'll be all right.
I think it's about finding your audience. So, you know, if you can, yes, find a safe place to do your kind of humor and people are laughing at it, and the other part of that equation is that you intend the laughter to come. You know, if people are laughing at you without you intending that to be, it's not really the same kind of impulse as somebody wanting to learn how to make comedy. But in some situations, and arguably my own, and definitely my double act partners, we found people were laughing at what we were doing when we were trying to be serious. So we just thought, well, okay, let's just be serious and get laughs, you know, and call it comedy.
Is that an interesting experience in the sense that you don't have control over what people necessarily find funny, and so you put together an act and you think, oh, this will be good, and then you demonstrate and no one laughs at those, but they laugh at you just standing there, and you think, okay, I need to amplify the volume on me standing here like a goofball, even though I'm not doing anything. People find that so funny. Is that a weird experience to say, oh, I really didn't expect that outcome?
It's a joyous experience.
Yes. It's a positive.
If that's where your search is, obviously, if you're trying to make a serious production of Macbeth, which I'm about to do next month at the Malt House.
Is that a shameless plug?
There's a massive poster on there.
There is, just on our street on Hoddle Street here.
So there you go. There's one.
Go and see David in.
But it's meant to be serious, and I'm thinking, where's the humour? You know, and it's.
You're going to try and just take over the show.
I really don't. I'm a bit nervous about what will happen because, you know, I arrive on stage and I've just got this kind of presence that that might provoke laughter, and I'm thinking, okay, how are we going to rein
that? Did your presence provoke laughter?
Well, I don't know, but
people find you funny in general.
Yeah, there's something about that kind of. I mean, if we really nut down to what my take on it is, so, you know, having looked at all those theories and then sort of made a piece of practical research work called How to Be Funny as well, I sort of boiled it down to this feeling of having an aspiration or you know, trying to do something sort of which is beyond your capacity, failing, but then not indulging in the failure, but sort of struggling on the rebound to get out of the failure. And I think there's a lot of art now which sort of indulges in the failure, and it's not funny at all. It's sort of, you know, smug.
Can you give an example of that?
No, I'm not defaming anybody on
No,
this.
you don't have to say names, and you can change things. You're clever enough to do that. What kind of examples? I'm not smart enough to work out what analogy.
I will call it, and please do pull me up if there's any kind of technical terms that, you know
us, of course we will. Just keep going, mate.
Okay, post-traumatic. There's a wave of work which sort of felt that acting was a bit embarrassing. How embarrassing trying to be something that's not yourself. Just be yourself. And so it came with this sort of deadpan, ironic vibe. I called it Shoreditch because it sort of, that suburb seemed to capture that spirit to me. This sort of.
I have a theory on this as well. Like, I actually want your opinion on this, and this will probably get you and probably not me in trouble, but you at least, which is enjoyable for me. I don't think Joaquin Phoenix acts. I think he's just a depressive loser. Any thoughts on that?
Well.
Is he in that style that you're talking about?
No, he's not at all.
Okay.
No, this is really in the live sector where the crossover between performance art and theatre exists. I actually think he's quite amazing that rap artist that he sort of went so deeply into role.
That was fake, wasn't it?
Well, exactly. I'm sure it was fake, but he just went so deeply and he was so committed to it. You had to kind of go along with this kind of.
Well, my theory on these last few movies is that he doesn't play anyone other than himself, and he keeps getting awards for it. I think he's just a depressive megalomaniac. I think that's just who he is.
Well, you know, you could say that a lot about acting, and that may be partly that kind of kickback against what I said. The criticism of post-traumatic theatre was that it was just a bit embarrassing to pretend So you just really work on aspects of yourself that are then enhanced, or you say these particular words, or you dance in front of the mirror in the case of the Batman, the Joker when he played that. But those are creative expressions. He's not doing that every morning breakfast. And he's certainly not looking gaunt like he was.
How do you know?
Well, because then 3 weeks later on the red carpet, he's looking plump and healthy again. Where you kind of imagine, okay, so this is the real Joaquin Phoenix, or. But again, if you look at the work of Goffman and so on, you see that everything we do, what we're doing right now, is a kind of performance. So we perform an everyday self.
Yeah,
it steels us against criticism in problematic areas, gives us that kind of boundary. And we'll come back to that point when we talk about my coaching later.
Well, I think we can talk about it in relation to psychology, because that starts straight away. For people who don't know, David's now gone into studying psychology, and I know that you're not necessarily using it for your theatre work and your productions, but I assume that there's crossover. Can you talk to and maybe elaborate on whether you think that there are certain personality traits or things that you're learning in that field that you think actually lend itself not only to what you just mentioned, that ability to move and morph almost like a chameleon through different personas, but also, potentially that allows people to be a bit more creative.
Absolutely, yeah. I came to psychology really after working in psychology for a lot of a large body of work, which was sponsored by the Wellcome Trust, which is a pharmaceutical company that now commissions artwork and research in England. So there's a bit of an ethical dilemma about it.
That's an interesting combination.
Yeah, but they supported us very well for a block of about 5 years, and we made a series of pieces about contemporary mental health issues, starting with psychosis and then evolving into a sort of invented mental illness called complicated grief, which was proposed for inclusion in the next issue of the Diagnostic Statistical Manual for Psychiatric Disorders, DSM-5. Suggested that. So I was doing this body of work, and we had collaborators.
Stop 1 second. Yeah. So your creative work started to lend itself actually into a research arm of psychology.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Why?
Do you think that naturally happened, or do you think, and is it an expression of, I always think about this, and this is like, I was probably the most critical person of artistic kind of endeavors as a younger person because I was really stupid and arrogant. But now the time goes on, I see more than anything, and I think this is a Dostoevsky thing, like humans don't really live other than to often please our own aesthetic, right? And it's these aesthetic pursuits that drive so much of our behavior.
Yeah.
And art, to me, has become something that, and it's all forms, obviously, and people are attracted to different forms, but it evokes the opportunity to explore emotional realms that you may not actually necessarily explore. And the thing that I always find really interesting, and I don't know whether you can articulate this much better than I am doing, but the complexity of emotional experience that you can have viewing even something that's like a painting is so vast. It seems to defy the logic of the fact that it's one observation of something over a very short period of time, and it's one image. I don't know, I'm rambling, but does that seem?
No, I understand what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I find the most enriching artistic consumption that I have is in pretty minimal, with minimal provocation. So I particularly enjoy watching dance and dance theatre, even though I don't do that. But I find that there's this sort of space for me to meet the work. And I think with two-dimensional work and sculptures and so on, you sort of, there is always that space because you're in this kind of blank whiteness and you're kind of told to drop the world behind and just meet the work. And that's a wonderful sort of happening.
I know we're getting away from the question that I asked originally, but do you do you think that we actually understand as a society the value of this? Because as I said, as a younger, dumber person, I'm not going to even pretend that's not true. I didn't see the value until I started to experience that. And it's so enriching. But I feel like particularly in the world we live in, that is, everything's so practical and efficient, we seem to miss this idea of what these experiences do for enhancing our human experience generally.
I'm looking at Jack. Are you feeling left out? Are you okay?
No, Jack
He's used to this.
Jack probably consumes this stuff more than I do, because he actually has, particularly through his brother, he has quite an involvement in music. And his brother has actually been a big influence on me to explore much more music, because I don't listen to music much at all. But his brother, particularly Thomas, has actually been quite a big influence on me exploring older stuff and things that are much more classical, for instance. And it seems to me that if you look at our society, particularly in somewhere like Australia, that it's become hyper practical, and our investment, it seems like, in things like the arts is going down, like most areas. We're losing out because of that.
I think often, the arguments from the sector when faced with funding cuts are to go to those formative experiences, and you say, well, what was it that awakened you as a human being? And that a formative experience might have been in COVID, for example, where people consuming lots and lots of artistic expression, in the form of movies and radio, music, whatever.
There's another good question for you coming, but keep going.
Yeah, so you kind of go, well, this, in times of break, you have a relationship breakup or something. The first thing you do is want to find some music that speaks to that.
Breakup music. Everyone's got that playlist
mix. The get together mix, the difficult sort of second wave mix.
It's so funny how it sounds like a bit of a trope. You watch movies and it's almost you can do the whole arc through a couple of songs.
Yeah. The thing I think about straight away with music, though, too, is how people use it a lot now to regulate their emotions.
Yes.
Because it does invoke emotions as well, which sometimes is to reinforce an emotional state you're already in, or maybe to try and shift your emotional state to something else that you want because you're about to do a gym session, you want to get pumped up. Or
I mean, exactly. Last night I was sort of on the way to coaching and I was feeling a bit kind of fatigued, let's say. I kind of needed to go into role, and I needed to find the music that would get me from fatigue to coach persona,
and motivated to actually carry out that role.
And sometimes it's too brutal to just go, right, 160 beat per minute, what's the mixtape? And because it's already there, I need something that's going to get me there. So in the case of last night, it was this superb album by a band called Gallows Street that was a response to different landscapes in the Netherlands. And the album starts very sparse, but, in the sort of 20-minute journey from my place to Coburg, it got to, the coast, let's say, and I was sort of ready then to deal with my...
It's interesting you say that, because I feel like it's something that the best albums, and younger people these days, I don't necessarily even understand the idea of an album having a performance sequence, because they don't consume it in that way, which is a bit of a shame.
It's about hits now.
Yeah, it's a bit of a shame. And I do think that some artists still definitely do it. But for instance, I remember as a complete album, it was the first time in my life that I think I really understood it as a complete album. I don't know if you know the British band Alt J.
Oh, yeah, I do.
When they brought out their first major album, I remember listening to it on one continuous drive. It was on the radio and they played the whole thing. And I just thought, actually, that's one piece that all fits together perfectly. And they had all these, interestingly, it's clearly made like that. They have all these like interludes that actually sit between sort of parts
hidden
of
tracks and that kind of
but it was really interesting because it was one of the first times that I recognized as an adult, like, oh, actually artists are actually thinking about how they construct that. And it's exactly what you're saying. It took you to a certain place and you often know where you want to get to, or at least in a headspace by that time.
Yeah. I'm going to go to track 3 to 6.
That's funny you say that.
But I think there's actually, I wonder if there's a correlation between the phenomenon we see now where people don't listen to an album. Obviously, not that long ago, if you wanted to listen to music, it would only be a live performance, or then it'd be a record and you couldn't really control changing songs.
Yeah, it was a bit hard.
Where nowadays we obviously have Spotify, which allows you to listen to literally every song, any song in the world, here and now. And I do wonder how that influences the art, because it seems that people's attention spans are waning and people's commitment to go, I'm going to go watch this theatre production, go out, get to a particular venue at a certain time, spend 1, 2, 3 hours watching this performance and then go home. That seems to also be waning as well. And I wanted to ask this question to you, because do you think that a lot of the expression of art now is through more mimetics? Like I think about social media and meme culture, which it seems to be invading every element of society. That seems to be much more of an expression of art. And I think that also aligns with people's attention span, because so many mimetics now are 2-3 seconds. It seems that that has a big influence on the shift of the arts scene, because people's attention spans are becoming much less.
I think there's a lot of anxiety because of the lack of resources, and that leads you to this kind of focus on the mimetic aspect.
Yeah.
Mimesis has always been a core part of art making. And, one of the pre-questions about creativity, that is an absolute cornerstone for me. That you say, okay, everything's been done before, pretty much. So let's embrace that. Let's copy the masters. And because inevitably in the copying, certainly in the performing arts, it's going to just the process of going through your body and your mind will end up with a very different piece of work. So you do that as a kind of training exercise, you do that as research, and then eventually you sort of drop all the source moments, and then you end up with your unique product. And this came up in your chat with Massimo, which was quite interesting. And, there he was talking about establishing an aesthetic, establishing a brand, and so on. And I think, there are comfort spots in the aesthetic. If you think about where did my aesthetic come from, and it's often from your sweet spots in your life, your upbringing, that time that you were happy in this place and with this person and so on. And so you go back to those moments and you want to try and recreate them. And so, in this high-speed culture we're in, we go to that thing that was last on the top of our feed because it made us laugh or it made us smile or whatever. So you go, that's that. But it's a very shallow experience.
Yes,
absolutely.
And yes, I am on one hand sort of thinking about a 20-minute play festival in order to
make it commercially viable.
Yeah, that's right. Lure an audience. But at the same time, I want to do that deep thinking work that goes into what this kind of more soulful, reflective, meaning-making area. So, like if you think about comedy, you can go through those theories that I was talking about and functionally produce laughter, but you will completely forget it afterwards. Like, we were trying to remember a Jimmy Carr joke, but it's just like it's gone, because in the moment it's funny, but really it's not that deep or not interesting. And maybe there's a meme of it, but you just kind of go, I don't know, it just diverted me temporarily. If you really want to get into people's hearts and minds and get those formative experiences that we're talking about that justify art, then you have to do this work that goes way beyond functionality.
Can we get onto that?
Yeah.
Because I think it leads perfectly into this.
Yeah.
The thing that I find really interesting, and I we'll get onto the coaching, because for people who don't know, you also coach track and field, and you're a track and field athlete yourself, still competing in masters competition. But one of the experiences that I have often is I'm a big consumer I particularly like movies, right? And I like exploring movies that have interesting concepts, interesting ideas. And I wouldn't mind actually getting your opinion on this, but even recently I went to Japan with one of my athletes, and on the plane, I saw that there was a newish movie from Yorgos Lanthimos, I think his name is the director, and it's called Poor Things, I think the name of this.
Yeah.
With Emma Stone.
Yeah, I know it, but I haven't seen it.
Anyway, but he's I find him a really interesting director because he does these movies that really push the boundaries. I don't know if you've seen the movie Killing of a Sacred Deer.
I have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is the director, and also The Lobster. Have you seen The Lobster?
I've seen it too.
Yeah.
These are Colin, what's his name?
Colin Farrell's
sorry,
he's in both of them actually.
Yeah.
Um,
No, it sounds like the kind of thing I would like.
you would love this.
Yeah,
You would love this director. He's a fantastic director, but he chooses these stories, and some of them are Greek tragedies and these ideas. And I try and push some of these younger athletes that I coach, like, watch these movies, and they watch them and they go, "Fuck, you're weird. Like, why would you watch the stupidest film? It was so weird." All this. And I say to them, they're like, "Do you like that?" And it's not that the experience that you have with this is not about necessarily finding it pleasurable on a surface level. It's about you exploring the idea and having an emotional experience that takes you away from your day-to-day functioning. And that, to me, is what really good art does. And that's exactly what I feel like you were saying, of you need to go deeper. You need to try and give people the opportunity to explore an idea at some level of depth that they maybe haven't experienced. And
well, I was going to say, just to actually reinforce that, John, it's actually more valuable when you have that experience and you go, that was just so bizarre or so outside of my concept of how I sort of see reality, that it's probably the most useful, because you get the biggest shift to go, well, hang on a second, I've never actually considered looking at something.
And what would I do in that situation? Or, you know, what is my conception of this situation? It's really interesting, and I try and push them to watch these things, not because I think that they necessarily will enjoy it, but actually to push their ability to deal with both the psychological and emotional aspects of asking themselves those questions of, like, what would I do in this situation? And I think that to me is a really important function of art. But as Jack said, people's attention span is low, and also people's willingness to put themselves in uncomfortable emotional situations seems to be diminishing, because I think for a reason, and I'm guessing here, but I think for the reason that our world is more and more uncertain, so people don't want to even then consume entertainment that pushes that. But I actually think it's helpful because it expands your envelope of resilience in some aspects.
Which is transferable totally to the coaching world.
Yeah.
But, you know, if you come back to, you know, you asked before about personality types, who's kind of more creative, or let's say more, you know, willing to experience a film even that's sort of outside of the Marvel universe.
Well, we can get onto Martin Scorsese's, you know, questioning of Marvel being cinema.
Yeah. What, you know, one of, like, as I said, I kind of, psychology for me is more about articulating what I kind of felt I had a handle on anyway, through exploring characters and stories and so on. And, you know, one of those articulations is this idea of the 5 big personality types. So, you know, we have, we're probably all on a spectrum for all of them, but we have different sort of emphases. So openness to experience
seems to be the one.
But at the same time, you know, you kind of, if you translate that into actual creativity, you also need a bit of extroversion in order to express that kind of interest, that curiosity. And maybe if it wants to be on social justice themes, you also have to have aspects of the personality trait of conscientiousness.
Yes.
And if you want to persuade other people to come in with you and do this, you have to have a fairly strong score on the agreeableness trait. And then I was thinking, well, that leaves just neuroticism then. There's the only one left. And in a way, you kind of go, well, I can't not express this idea. And you start worrying about this problem. And then
that motivates you to do it. Yeah.
So really, you sort of got all of them firing. But really, for me, the kind of that initial impulse is openness to experience, the curiosity. So it's why you read medical papers, why you go to Italy to do your studies, why you try a different training protocol or whatever, and you're hoping that your athletes will come with you. You know, so the question is, can you create that culture that brings, or in my case, an audience to try this different experience? You know, will you try running backwards up a hill with a weighted vest on? You know, those kind of things. How can you use your agreeableness to win them to get buy-in, as Brett Bartholomew calls it in conscious coaching. So, you know, we have different impulses, but yes, society at a particular time can influence that. So we're feeling like we're overwhelmed with the world. So we're probably less inclined to be curious because we're scared. And fear is such a powerful driving force in all of
Such
it.
an inhibitor, isn't it?
Yeah, and that fear can be, you know, your ego being damaged by not winning that race. And that's often the problem that I found with my young athletes, is that they've come through their school, their little region, and they've won and won and won and won and won. And suddenly, you know, they've gone to district or region and been hammered.
Yeah.
You know, and suddenly it's all over for them. Then there might be one chance where you go, okay, let's rebuild. And we've got to accept that losing is going to be the experience you get most of the time. Well, not winning, let's say. You know, you're going to...
If you really think about it, it's the most probable outcome.
Yeah, you're going to lose. You're going to get injured. These things are going to happen. But, you know, believe me, and this is where the trust thing comes in, that you've got to win that trust to say, look, I've seen it, or I've actually done it myself.
I've experienced this, and
this is the kind of trajectory that happened. But there's this little golden path, you know, that could lead to amazing glory if we navigate and approach this with a spirit of humility and curiosity. We can get there. We can trick our way through.
I'm loving the way that you're describing this. Is this something that you think lends well from your performative experiences to your coaching? Because there is a performative aspect, I think, to coaching. And as you said, it's about balancing those tensions between bringing someone along for this ride and getting them to trust you and making sure that they stay open to the experience and wanting to explore. And that has an element of danger in it. Is this something that you found helpful in your ability, especially with younger athletes, to take them on that journey?
Yeah. You know, I got into coaching just as a kind of COVID side gig. You know, my own children were idling, and I started saying, well, why don't we get your friends who would do a socially distanced exercise session?
You go over there.
That's right. And look, you five, or whatever the number was at the time, are over there. You happen to be doing the same thing as we're doing, and you're doing that because you can see us doing it. There's nothing illegal.
We're getting around the rules with you, David.
Absolutely. You know, just because I could see their lives deteriorating. Going down.
You don't need to justify it to us.
No.
So, and then, you know, that kind of migrated into offering squad training for juniors at Coburg. And I sort of quickly saw that, you know, what the patterns were. That Little Ass was bustling with these sort of driven parents going, come on, PB this week. PB
We've got to go to regions, we've got states.
That's right.
You're going to be world champion at 7.
Yeah, and then girls especially, complete disappearance, you know, from sort of 13 to beyond, you know. And if you were lucky, there was somebody who'd got nationals and kind of was getting enough affirmation that would get them through that awkward time.
I always have this discussion with people, and no one's willing to have. Everyone thinks that it's some rubbish about, like, I don't even know what they think it is. I think the main reason, male, female, that people drop out of athletics is because they realize they're no good. Right? And that's a horrible experience for most people, especially around 12 or 13. It's the first time you have almost, you know, that a level of awareness to go, I'm actually no good at this.
It's also very in your face compared to, say, a team sport where you can hide behind other.
Oh, we won.
We
won the footy game. And it's like, yeah, but you did nothing. You played centre half bench for the whole game.
Yeah.
As opposed to athletes where it's like, oh, wow, I lost that race by 30 meters. You know?
It's very exposing.
Yeah.
But, you know, I have to say no good. You know, you're saying from their point of view, it's like, you know, this person can run 10.2. I can only do 11.5.
Yeah.
Therefore, I'm no good. 11.5 is excellent. You know, like,
well,
maybe not in your book. But...
No.
Relative to what, I guess.
Yeah. No, but it's not about the performance. And as I said, like, I think this is the big thing that we don't have discussions on, because it seems to even affect people's ability in a workplace. People can't seem to separate. And I think this is actually a major, I don't know where this came from. You may know because of your psychology studies. This tying of people's worth to the activities that they do. You know, like they seem it's either career or sport. They create this identity of like, that's who I am. And it's like, no, that's what you do. Who you are is the underlying, you know, structures of your personality, your values, all of those things. And you demonstrate that through the activities that you do. But they get it wrong when you say, oh, that performance wasn't very good. And they take that as a personal criticism. It's like, no, I'm criticizing your performance.
Yeah.
Right? If I said that you have no ability to get better, that's a very different thing, because then I'm criticizing your capabilities and your skill set, which is actually makeup of who you are as a person.
But the other thing I think of, though, John, is talking about as a coach challenging athletes' perceptions through, even say watching a movie, of the discomfort that pushes them into within a facet of their life that they don't feel confident or comfortable with. Because I think of a good athlete is probably very happy to take on criticism and feedback about this is what you need to do next.
They don't even register it in any negative way. They just see it as an opportunity to work on whatever's next.
But then they may not see that opportunity in terms of developing certain psychological attributes, even though part of this journey is to go, you actually need to develop these traits or have a more openness to actually see the change you want in your performance.
Well, that's a good question, I think, for you, Dave. Is one of the biggest challenges that I've had, and I'd love your opinion on this with coaching, is it doesn't seem to be any issue with, as Jack just mentioned, pushing people physically. People will enjoy the idea of punishing themselves physically. They like doing hard sessions, as you know, especially in the 400, 800s, lactic, and I trained really hard and I'm really tired, I'm sweating and I'm on the ground, I vomited. And I'm serious. And as you know, there's almost a badge of merit for working really hard, which some of those things are cultural to Australia, some are not. But if you ask them to do something that is psychologically uncomfortable, they will run from it so quickly it's not even funny. And I don't seem to, I'm working on it as much as I can through some of these discussions, but do you see that, and do you have some ideas around how you can kind of take people along for that psychological discomfort? Because you mentioned it early. No matter who you are, no matter what level you're at, you are going to experience negative outcomes as part of your, say, sporting career. You're going to have injuries, or the high probability you're going to have injuries, you're going to have setbacks, you're going to have poor performances, you're going to have illness, you're going to have family things, or, you know, exams or whatever that is going to have detrimental effect on your performance. And you've actually got to be quite comfortable with accepting those probabilities.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're what we're talking about here is the same point I was saying before about going deep. So yes, on the surface, I vomited, I went, I sweated, I breathed hard, whatever. But when you say, you are only going to get to national level, or, forget about the Olympic dream, you're a national level athlete, that's a tough moment to accept. And that might be, I'm saying it's just a genetic limit. You cannot go beyond that. And that's really hard for some people to accept that. And so you then have to go, well, actually, how do I measure whether I am good at this or not? And you have to look at other aspects of what is athletic conditioning all about, what is the joy of movement, that feeling of the thrill of ilinx is what Roger Caldwell called it. The feeling of just, it's hard to get a word to it, but that feeling almost like falling. I'm falling into this kind of oxygen debt. I'm falling into acidosis. I'm falling into, extreme fatigue, and to somehow kind of see the benefit of that. And often, the hard thing to sell with athletes, like you said, is the rest part, is how I'll bounce back from that. We're going to have 5 minutes rest now between these reps. Tell that to a soccer player. And, they just don't know what to do themselves. So, culturally, we've got a big, big battle, to try and back up an argument like that, a 5 minute fix your hair time.
You might struggle with that, man.
That's right. But one of my first trainers as a coach, level 2 ATFCA, he said, give them a mirror. They'll occupy themselves. Give them a phone. But selling, like, it's a culture change, So just to come back to the question we still haven't answered is, what are the benefits of coming into this, with an artistic practice, is that you're good at doing kind of chameleon-like changes, but also this sense of, in your dramaturgical way, that sense of what is this doing for the bigger picture, and always encouraging the athlete to zoom out and look at their long-term development. So with my group at Coburg, for example, they all came to me around 13, 14, that kind of age. And I said, well, we're looking at Brisbane 2032. That's when you're that age, you'll be at the peak of your physical development. And so it doesn't matter if you don't win Little Ath's 200-meter hurdles this week.
Yeah. It's very funny, though, because I don't think people are very good at looking in long time scales, especially when you're younger. And I know I wasn't, because you're impatient and you have much less understanding of what time scales even feel like. I'm sure you're older than Jack and I, but I don't feel any older than what I did when I was 25, even though I recognize heavily my behaviors are very different and how I think about the world is different, but I don't physically feel any different. And so it's this weird concept of you don't know what timescales even feel like, or you almost don't have the concept. And it's for anyone who hasn't maybe thought of this, it's like, actually think about what you are going to be experiencing when you're 80 years old. When you go and think about it, you're like, what will I be like? Will I feel like me, or will I feel like a completely different person? You don't know what that is like. And I think young people, with the lack of time, they actually don't know what that feels like. So you say to them 2032, and they're saying, well, that means absolutely nothing, even though what you're saying is so correct and it's so fair in terms of their overall development.
I think the thing is just taking them away from that kind of pressure cooker accountability that Little Ath's culture is.
That's a dangerous part, Little Aths.
So my group became quite sort of molded quite quickly into a crossover sort of thing. It's not open athletic carriers. They're not going to do every single round of cross country, and it's not purely Little Aths. They're not going to do every single week chasing that PB with their parents screaming at them. We're in this kind of crossover zone where the focus is not about times and races, but it's about general conditioning, about developing their personalities so that they are robust and resilient.
How do you think that will eventually be reflected in their performance?
I think I'm going to come out with a community of incredible people, who some of whom will pursue elite athletics, others will not, but they'll stay active and involved. And so,
do you think that has to be, obviously that's something that you're very aware of? Right? 'Cause some people don't care about. They're like, I'm just here to help this person get a result, whereas it's clear that you want to help them develop as people. What do you think is the benefit of that? And this is going to sound interesting, but is that a selfish pursuit on your part because it's enjoyable for you to be involved in that?
I'd say it's a selfless pursuit, in that I'm interested in building social capital and community. I'm not chasing my elite. Because I could have dropped 18 of them already and just gone with the 2 that are, sort of have the most genetic potential and the right kind of mindset. And so but I don't want to do that. I want to.
That's what I'm saying. Is it selfish that you're doing what you want to do?
Well, if the athlete feels like, and this is where, my approach might be a hindrance. You ask, like, what are the positives? I said culture building, but it's also inventiveness, responsiveness, developing kind of performance-like focus, curiosity, humility, engendering those good things. But if you think the hindrance is where you've got the gun athlete who is just on this kind of pathway, and they're sort of seeing you, attend to an athlete who can't even run, who's just come
trying
back
to teach
from,
them skills,
scoliosis surgery last week, and they seem really keen on athletics. And so I don't want to neglect that person, because I'm all about developing the group. But when I get my specialists, like I've got one young triathlete, for example, I'll do other work with them and say, it's still important that you come to the general session, the community building, and also your general conditioning. And we'll do little bits of specific work. But really, you've got to the point now where we're going to work outside of this as well. And that's a hell of a commitment, And if I feel like I can't give them the time, I'll refer them. Like I asked you about long jump and triple jump. That's often one pathway that I go, yeah, you need to go there. And I know that Tom is looking for athletes, and I'm always thinking, okay, if I've got a sprinter that is just doesn't need, inventiveness, doesn't need culture, is just so driven, like an Arben Darney, for example, they've got to go to a specialist coach pretty urgently. And I've got no problem with that. And I would see, and Jeff Risley as well, I would readily refer a distance athlete that I felt they're just on that path. They don't need my kind of skill set. And I'm really good with that. Like I believe in the ecology of sport.
I was going to say, I think people too often overlook the value of physical pursuits for just personal development. And that seems to be something that you're really pushing here as well. One of the things that you're particularly interested in, of what we actually gain as individuals by having the discipline of working at something, persevering, particularly because the reality is most people you're going to work with are not going to be elite or professional athletes. You're not doing it for that, so to speak. Well, you may be, but that's usually going to be the exception unless you've reached a stage where you're getting professional athletes coming to you to seek your services.
Yeah, I mean, we it's my own story. Like I was an elite junior in West Wales training on tarmac roads in what we called DAPs, which were sort of crap shoes of some sort, which had a sort of sporty logo, but really, compared to nowadays, it's like a pair of slip-on Uggs or something, But yeah, I was driven and committed, and but there came a point where life just took over. But yet I missed it so much. Mental health wise, I could feel this kind of gap in my realm of experience that I craved, and I was lucky that I'd had enough of it as a youth to remember it, but there were 13 odd years there where I missed it, I craved it, and I want to sort of, especially when I work with fellow masters, just remind them, like, this is for life. We're doing this, you might not be running 60 seconds at 60 years old, but you might be running 80 seconds at 80, and then you will be the world champion. Just stick with it. It's great. It's so good.
One of the things that I wanted to ask you, because I think it's an interesting crossover in terms of what you said, there's a reason why you do pursuit and you set up your training environment the way you do. And I think that to me reminds me a lot of the creative pursuits. And I don't know, have you read Rick Rubin's book on creativity?
I don't know that one. No.
Do you know Rick Rubin, the music producer?
I think I've heard you mention him, but I don't know him.
I'd be interested to hear. It has some quite a spiritual slant to it. But one of the things that he talks about, quite significantly, is that his belief strongly with, especially the top artists he's ever worked with, is that you should never ever create art for the audience.
Oh yeah.
He think his mentality is that the greatest art is always art that you create as an expression of your own experience or whatever that may be.
Yeah.
And then you don't own, once you put it out into the world, you don't own it anymore. It's now for the audience to decide what they want to do with that. And you shouldn't necessarily in any way be concerned with how they interpret it, because it's not for you to decide that. You shouldn't be looking at it and I want them to interpret it this way. And I think about this a little bit in terms of coaching, because there has been a shift towards, and I you spoke about golden path. I sit on this fence, and I sometimes sit on one side and sometimes I'm on the other, of, do you really individualize down to that person? Or do you say, no, I'm making the environment that I can make, that I know speaks to me and is in my skill set? And if that fits you, great. But if it doesn't fit you, then I'm not upset, but I just can't set up something that's based around you, because that doesn't fit within what I'm capable of even producing. And to me, it's that very interesting balance that I'm sure you play with every day in terms of commerciality of creative pursuits versus something that's really an expression of your skill set.
Yeah.
That if you do that, I think in some ways, it often creates such amazing art or performances that the recognition will come, even though you were not trying to create any commercial value to what you were doing.
Yeah. I think this came up with the Massimo chat as well.
Yes,
he's running a business. He's got to sell that jacket. Which actually, I have to say, it's quite a nice jacket.
See if you can get a discount code for it.
Yeah, well, I thought that's reasonable. After your talk, I thought, oh God, I bet his jackets are really expensive. But,
They're not ridiculously expensive.
But yeah, he's obviously found a bit of a sweet spot there with classiness versus usability, affordability, etc. But yeah, if I make a piece of work and audiences leave, I'm not going to be performing that work much longer. But
how do you actually deal with that when?
Yeah.
I'm sure there's actually probably even, say, friends or colleagues or people that you really think are strong judges of this who you think can be objective, and they say, like, that's actually some of your best work, David. But the audience goes, nah, we're out of here.
Yeah. Well,
how do you deal with that?
Well, I've had situations like that. I remember particularly one strong moment in Edinburgh where I was playing in this room, in the assembly rooms, called the Edinburgh Suite, and they had a fire exit out to the street, Rose Street. And an entire row just shuffled along, pushed open the fire exit to the street, and left. And I said, I was in character at the time, I said, good, that's got rid of them. And I, managed to just wait long enough that I got the audience on my side, because they're obviously dying to see what's he going to do. Is this going to crush him? Or, is he going to find a way to come back from the dead? And then having got that amazing laugh and response, then I sort of went out the fire exit myself and shouted after them, any chance of a lift to Peckham? Which, of course, is not in Edinburgh at all. But I was just feeling like I was on a vibe, and that, and I've had other occasions where John and I, actually the same show, because that had the most sort of license to do that kind of thing, and was also the most out there piece that did tend to
push the boundary.
Make people leave. There was a time where I think we were in Manchester Met University and playing a theatre there. And again, there was a fire exit to a sports ground. It's a sports science place. And we ran out of the building and we were out on the playing field doing stuff for about 5 minutes. And the audience were all still inside going, what are they doing? I can't believe it.
Could they see you?
Yeah, they could hear us. They could see us kind of
running around you.
They're laughing. They just didn't know, it's so edgy for somebody just to leave the room. So, there are examples where you push the boundary, you try something, you sense, are they with me? Are they with me? And this is a really key skill, for us as coaches. It's like, I'm sensing, I'm reading that person. And this is where, I'm hoping that my psychology is going to come together with my performing art stuff, with my coaching, and I'll be able to read the person so well, like Dan Paff talked about this, screening them just in wicket run. You can tell what's going on in their life just by the way you've got the standard exercise. You go, oh yeah, what's going on? Something's happening. I'm sensing,
Have you ever heard of performers coming up with an idea that actually fails to begin with, but they go, I actually need to continue with this and persevere because I know ultimately the audience will align with what I'm trying to create
all the time.
Because I think in that, like even in like a performance or rehab setting where there's clearly people out there with some great ideas and some great innovation, but the masses may not be willing to hear it yet or take it on board because it's such a contrast to their current belief system.
There's so much evidence of this, I think, in art in general, where all these artists that died poor.
Yes.
And then,
like Van Gogh, for instance.
100 years later, their art's being sold for millions and millions of dollars. And it's the same with, happens with books. It happens with, obviously it happens with, paintings and things like that. But I think it even happens a lot with movies where people at the time, no one liked it. And then it becomes this cult classic. They're like, oh, yeah, this is from the 70s and everyone thought this was stupid at the time. And then everyone's going, oh, yeah, you better watch this film. It's a real piece of history.
They're now attending special screenings dressed in the costumes of the main characters.
Well, from what I got told, that's what happened with Pulp Fiction, for instance. At the time, it wasn't actually that well received. It didn't win any awards. It came out in the same year as like Forrest Gump and all this. So it got smashed and everyone was just like, oh, this is a weird film. by this, Tarantino bloke who's done
It's
Reservoir
pretty
Dogs.
wacky, yeah.
And now everyone's like, oh, if you haven't seen Pulp Fiction, you've missed out on, more.
People talking about Samuel Jackson should have got an award for best supporting actor and all the stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that film. I love it.
That's fantastic.
It's a very great film.
The watch.
There's just so many lines in it. A Royale with cheese.
Yeah. Beautiful playing with structure. Like.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I just break your concentration?
But that kind of that was innovative at the time, but at the same time, he was just sort of plundering Pulp Fiction, like you said. He was just a plunder.
It's actually a good example because he seems to be someone who's always been like, "This is what I want to do," and if you don't like it, I don't give a shit.
Yeah. It takes a certain amount of chutzpah, to courage, let's say, to keep the faith. And, faith is coming back to comedy. It's absolutely critical that you believe what you're doing is funny. And, then you get an audience who believe that what you're doing is funny. And then newcomers who are thinking, what is this? I don't get it. And then they see 100 people laughing. They go, oh, it's quite funny. And then they're in there.
The question I have for you, particularly in the coaching setting, is where do you lean on this? Do you think that it's about attracting the people that are open to going on that journey? Or do you think it's about having the skill set to bring people along? Because whilst I think you can do both, I think it's probably energy wasted.
Yeah. Well, I'm the second. I take all comers. The requirements I say to people who approach me about whether their child can do training with me, which is the usual thing. I say, well, are they ready for structured training? Have we gone beyond playing? Sort of athletic,
the first involvement people have.
And I did a little bit of that coaching, and I had my athletes pretending to be kangaroos, and then I was the guy with the gun hunting them. And that was our blocks practice. I'd say, do you hear me rustling? On your marks. Do you hear the click of the gun? Set. Bang! And then
they run.
But they're all like this and bouncing. But it was working on their reaction at least, and some plyometric. But yeah, look, I quickly realised that I want to go with
a bit more structure,
the pathway. I want to offer this elite pathway, but also lines of retreat and culture building. And really, I'll take anyone who's expressed that initial impulse for structured training. And yeah, as you know, I will also at the same time, I'm trying to develop myself as a coach. So I'm on this mentorship with Altis. And
how are you finding that?
Well, I found it, I really felt like I should have done my sports science degree before I started. But, I've done so much of my own research that I kind of felt like I could get away with it. Like I could perform the role as a very knowledgeable coach, but at times I had serious imposter syndrome, because you've got people like co-mentors, especially working with the All Blacks or very high level coaches. But it was actually the guy from the All Blacks, Peter Hughes, who's in sort of mentoring me as a co-mentor along with Dan and Stu. He said, I was looking at your bio. Why don't you do a project about performance? Because All Blacks are using performance now, and the guy who's initiated that, and they were all now learning musical instruments, apparently. You can imagine gnarly,
big 120 kilo props
playing the jazz flute.
And he said, they're looking at that as a way of kind of in attunement, that as a team, they're sort of thinking about how they, but also, for all the other benefits of it.
I hope they keep doing that. We might actually have a chance of beating them.
I don't know, John. Wallabies these days.
The All Blacks Orchestra. So he told me as well, he'd come from Ireland. He used to work in Derry, where I was based there for 6 years. So we kind of had lots in common. And he was talking about how the person who initiated that kind of creative strand with All Blacks is now applying it at Irish rugby. And, those are the two kind of most incredible, culturally sort of driven, and maybe Wales should be in there as well, really. But the Irish rugby are working with a theatre company called Druid Theatre Company from Galway about, this sort of skill set that a theatre director is bringing in. anyway, so he said, why don't you make your project about that? So I looked at the literature and, I found very, very, very little written about this area. There's Bartholomew's book, Conscious Coaching, which talks a little bit about this kind of relationship building, a bit about comedy, but it feels very kind of dated to me, even though it's from 2015. He's talking about demeaning yourself as a sort of way of making people laugh. And you're going, okay, well, that's one theory of comedy, but, an adaptation of superiority, but it's not the full picture. So with their encouragement, I've gone more deeply into this. There was an actor in the UK who got a bronze medal at London 2012. His name is Fuzz. Nickname Fuzz. Everybody called him Fuzz. And he was an actor who trained at RADA, which is the drama school in England. And he was bringing a character to his coaching, which was like this hardcore bully, and he said, well, it's just a performance. But, he got out of his group a bronze medal at London 2012.
Yeah, with Robbie Grabars, yeah.
Yeah, which of course was like everything.
You've heard what happens more recently.
Yeah, he's been banned.
Yeah.
And it's for bullying, for all the things that he was proudly saying he was doing, maybe apart from the sort of
we may not have time, but
stuff.
We may not have time, but one of the things that I am really struggling with at the moment is the fact that I think sometimes the timescales, whilst, as you said, it might be 2032, it's not actually a long period of time when you think about someone's development. And I always play these games where I'm trying to push people's psychological development. And I get it wrong often, where I push them a little bit too quickly. But often it's also to see where they land on it. And I think one of the things that we're getting really wrong at the moment, I think, in this safe space idea is that we are too far away from the line. And that'll sound very controversial, but if you don't work in high performance sport, you may not know what I mean. But essentially, like, the realities of, and it's sport, so it's not life, but the realities of sport are that it can be very jarring, and it can be very it can be very difficult to deal with situations of injury or performance, especially when at the highest level, there's money involved, there's opportunities involved, there's livelihood, all of these things. If you cannot deal with those things changing rapidly under your feet, then you actually don't have the skill set to deal with being in that environment. And part of, I think, as a coach, and I think this is what you're doing well from a young age, is trying to bring people to the understanding of, like, you need these skills. If you don't have them, you're actually underprepared to go to that 2032 thing. And one of the things that I've been talking a fair bit with some of the BIS stuff is, like, we're not doing a hell of a lot of psychological development of expanding people's capabilities. We talk about ideas like resilience, but I don't know that we're pushing people to even develop it. We're sort of saying, well, we'll give them a couple of little tools. But to me, that's, like, they're going to get thrown in the deep end. And it's not by you, it's by the sport itself. You have a major injury and you're out for 6 months, or you need
just
surgery.
Life in general too.
And you kind of need to have exposed people to those things. And we're scared to do that because it's almost seen as you're pushing them too hard and you're challenging them psychologically, or what you did was a form of abuse. And it's like, well,
and the reality is, when you push someone out of their comfort zone, it's going to evoke negative emotions in there. And for some people, they're not ready for that. And they actually, as a protective mechanism, they blame you.
Yes.
And that's a
natural
challenge.
Yeah.
Well, that's why, Dan's experience with Marion Jones ended up with coaches writing contracts, But yeah, I think, I want to take my athletes to forest in the dark and make them run blindly into
a tree.
The trees, But there's a gap. I'll say there's a gap between these two. If you look up at the sky, you can see the stars, but God knows what that's.
How poetic.
Go for it, And then, you combine that with cold water immersion. Like, I had a camp with my group down at Aries Inlet, and we were doing sort of a run up to the lighthouse, which was way beyond some of their kind of tolerance levels normally. But I said, and after this, we'll be jumping in at Butler's Bend there into the Paincalloch Creek. Which is
it's cold water,
freezing cold water. But you'll all be doing it, and I've got the floaty belts, and there's nice fluffy towels and a hot meal coming after. So those kind of lines of retreat, I don't really mean of them as that. They're more like adjuncts. So, like when you see Peter Boll in a gravity running treadmill, or, somebody, any kind of form of deep water running or therapeutic running where you can, like I've got my Spark trainer now, I've got my Elliptigo. I know that I can take a risk with that sprint training because I'm not going to lose 6 weeks. Because even if my Achilles is absolutely on fire,
you've got other things.
I've got other backup plans. So if I know about those, I'll take that risk in the reps. And food, a social structure that around it. And you think about this in psychology, the thing that works. If you remember if you've heard of the dodo bird effect, it's that everything works, but the therapeutic alliance, in other words, your coach-athlete relationship, and the network of support around the client, the person, at the center, the athlete, let's say, those things contribute more than whatever you do with them.
Yeah.
But obviously you've got to do something, which you believe in, and it is as well researched as you possibly can make it. So yeah, running naked in the forest, in the trees, in the dark, could well be the pathway to
I think let's end it on that. That's the perfect segue to finish. Running naked in the trees in the forest.
There's a really good book called The Comfort Crisis by, I think his name's Michael Easter, who teaches at Las Vegas University, I think it is. And he interviews a lot of different people in the book. And one of the guys he interviews says that I can't remember, it's maybe like every 3, 4, 6 months, he sets himself a challenge that is so difficult that he thinks there's at least a 50% chance that he'll fail doing it.
Let's talk about this. I spoke about the flow stuff recently, saying you should set targets that it's about a 40% failure opportunity. If it's too easy, it's not enough of a challenge. And if it's too hard, you're not going to do it. So it actually becomes demotivating as well.
No, for sure. And like the reason why I mentioned that is I just think about the importance of actually trying to do something that you may very well fail. And even if you do, how you then navigate through that psychological state.
Basically, the existence of a clown.
Of a clown.
A clown, exactly that. If you don't aspire to do something beyond your skill set, you're not going to get laughs because you're not going to fail, and we're not going to see you bounce back.
Can you? I know that you're short for time, but can you describe that? Because I've never really thought about the behavior of a clown and what that actually represents,
and the role and importance of that too.
Well, so I mean, my training was with Philippe Gaulier in Paris. He's one of the few clown schools in the world, apart from his colleague Pierre Bilond, who runs a sort of 1-week annual event in Switzerland, and then Jacques Lecoq, the late Jacques Lecoq, where Gaulier used to teach. So my stuff comes from that. Just to acknowledge that that's the world. But he talks about Mr. Flop. So if you don't invite Mr. Flop into your world, you're not going to get the spirit of the clown. So the clown, he would always set an impossible task. Okay, so 2 clowns get on stage, and you're now going to do Midsummer Night's Dream, but there's the rest of the cast are on a bus to another city in another country by mistake. And so now you're going to have to do it. And at some point, when you sense you've failed, you're going to have to call Mr. Flop. And there was like an old buzzard phone on the wall, and you'd sort of go, "Hello, everyone." He would always give you a character as well. So like mine was a French Foreign Legionary. And so I had all my sort of gear, and a big rucksack and a big pair of boots and a handkerchief off the back of my hat. And the first time I come on, I'm clumping like this. He goes, stop, bam, bam. And he'll stop you until you get off. You're boring. He said, you're too noisy, too horrible. You're horrible. Get off the stage like this. And there'd be 30 students, some of whom were just too terrified to go up and take that criticism. But then you'd also have a German guy I later worked with who would just keep getting up. He'd say, get off the stage, you're boring. Okay, 2 more clowns, and this time we're going to do blah, blah, blah. And he'd get up again. And you'd go, oh, come on. Just absorb what he's told you. You're too heavy on your feet or whatever. Take a breath and then come back. But he wouldn't. He would just come relentlessly back. So I feel like those learning experiences for me were like heavy boots, phone Mr. Flop, and acknowledge that you're failing, and then look for help. Like, how can I? And it's that spirit that audience laugh. Not so much, it's not mockery, but they kind of enjoy you struggling. But they also as much enjoy your aspiration. And that aspiration, and certainly the rebound moment when you failed and you bounce back with this, it's joyous, and it's a different kind of laughter, and it's philosophical, that you've found the seed of optimism, if you like. So yes, you can train optimism, you can train to be a clown. Some people find it a lot easier, but and they have a kind of bandwidth of tolerance for what some students think of as abuse. But my bandwidth was huge because my drama school training, I had a psychopathic bully just saying, get off stage.
That's another discussion.
C word. Yeah.
Have you seen the movie Whiplash?
Yeah, love that film. Yeah.
It's one of my favorite films
that was
ever.
My drama teacher. Exactly that.
I think about this concept a lot of like, how much does creativity require you being pushed to the depths of your understanding? And what that means, because I even think about this, I'm not a parent and I don't know whether I will be a parent, but I always think about the difference of, as a parent, is your job to create the most high-functioning human you can who contributes to society at the highest level, or is it to have, a healthy, happy person? Yeah. Because they're not necessarily always the same thing. No, and should you push your kids, or is that abuse?
Yeah, like I'm not a fan of the bullying approach. I've been directed by people who still follow that tradition. Both post-studentship. I mean, you wouldn't get away with it in the education environment anymore. And really, any time as a parent, you've seen your parents.
Question that I have for you is, even though it's clear that it's not healthy on lots of levels, do you think that in some cases it actually is the approach that works for particular individuals? Yeah. Because that's the thing that I found interesting. I actually, I always push people to watch that film, and I always want to know what they think. And weirdly, these days, everyone goes, "Oh, you just wouldn't do that. That's wrong." And my opinion is, it's wrong for 99.9% of people. But that's the whole point of what, the mentality of, and whether it's right or wrong, that music teacher's idea is, he's not looking for 99% of people. He's looking for the 0.001% person who turns into, one of the greatest musicians of all time. And that's his point. I'm not looking for.
And I think what's the intention there too, which is another thing to consider, because unfortunately, most people will criticize you based on your actions, even if it aligns with good intentions.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to look far to see coaches who are doing it. And often it seems to me a kind of lazy approach. You get 20 people sign up for your program, and you bully them, let's say, with 10 200s, and there's maybe like
one person who pops out every couple of years. Yeah.
Somebody who can tolerate it. They survive, and they've got rid of 19 of them. Happy days. They only have to look after one athlete.
Well, the question that you always have, and I think this is the hard part, is if that person goes on to say, be an Olympic finalist, were they going to get there anyway? Or is that the methodology that was actually most appropriate for them? And results to me speak much more than the approach, right? Like you said, and I agree with you. It doesn't really matter what you do sometimes. It's just, it just needs to work for that individual. Yeah. And sometimes what you think will work is not necessarily what does work. And you have to be open to the idea that the methodology that gets them there may be very, very different to what most people would actually benefit from.
Well, Fuzz, that's an example. You go, wow, okay. He got that guy from 88th to bronze medal, ranked 88th to ranked in the top 10 and winning the bronze medal. So performing on the day, as well as, sustaining a level of quality. But yeah, at that moment, it worked in that culture leading up to 2012. But post that, maybe he didn't get his next, potential person who was ranked 88th to get up there. And then he's exposed, his method's exposed. And we're going, well, really, should you be shouting and bullying people?
No, I don't think that necessarily works. The caveat that I always put on it is always, if you're in those roles, in high performance roles, at the end of the day, your job is to get results. It's not to necessarily be friends with everyone and for it to be, this super fun environment, because you're not dealing with the general community, where it should be about, as you said, building something of value. You're actually there to get a result, which I think these days people are really scared of, because it requires you to question sometimes the way in which you approach it and do things that sometimes maybe, morally or ethically questionable.
He's now in Saudi,
Yeah.
and he's been recruited by the director of UK Athletics High Performance Outlet from that time, who's recruiting other people. And he's also recruited Jessica Ennis's former coach, who's also currently banned.
Mm.
So they're all working in Saudi with, a different kind of culture where it's permanently looking just for results. But yeah, personally, I'm not going that way.
No. And this, just the fact that, so people understand, it's not to say that in any way necessarily even advocate for it, but I think you need to ask the question, why did it work in that environment? Are there aspects that I can take from that may actually enhance what I'm doing if I'm in such an environment?
Yeah.
And as you said, it doesn't work to just bully people all the time. That's the worst approach you can probably take.
I think, just that encultured kind of, let me say, atmosphere of violence or bullying, I experienced at drama school, and then latterly got invited to direct a show. And it was after about 6 or 7 years or so of practicing out in the world. And then I came back, and that culture of bullying was so strong that students were actually complaining to me that I wasn't bullying them enough, to get the performance out of them. So, they just were
wanting abuse almost.
They needed abuse to, of course, that could have easily flipped back. I mean, it might be just 2 or 3 voices that were asking for it, but then you can't really create bespoke bullying for one person without affecting the whole group. So I had to reject that. But I remember thinking deeply about it at the time, that I just feel like they are so deeply now in Stockholm syndrome here that the only way is to keep that culture's perpetuating itself. I mean, it's all gone now. One student ended up burning down the building. That's how much anger it generated and terror. But yeah, for some people, responding to terror works. Others, they're just going to get stressed out and burnt out. And I don't think it's really sustainable long term.
No, I don't think it's a sustainable practice. And that's the problem that you face. I've thought about this concept a lot, and it's probably a time for another discussion, but I don't know that you can create a level of turmoil and chaos, but if that exists in that environment, irrespective of the players in it, say for instance it's, a low socioeconomic, or there's a criminal background, or it's just a very difficult family situation, sometimes that stress in itself, emotionally and psychologically, drives a level of capability and resilience and skill set development. And I've thought a lot about, can you create that? I don't know that you can, because the only way to do it is what we're talking about, making people's lives extremely difficult. And when they see that you're volitionally doing that, it negates any of the benefit that may come out of it. But you see it over and over again in sport, in art, music, of these people who come from really horrible experiences. The number of people you see, say, for instance, America is a good example of, if you look at the representation, particularly of African American athletes, by and large, they come from quite difficult backgrounds.
Yep.
Low socioeconomics, drugs, the family's been involved in crime and things like, and it is their opportunity out that pushes them to develop these skills.
Yep.
I don't know that you can actually foster that at a volitional level.
I know what you're talking about, that research, because I came across it where they studied all these sort of elite achievers, and everybody had some kind of crisis in their development at some point, and that they got through. But I think, if you think about Stu, we were talking about Stu McMillan and Dan Paff, and the way they kind of dramaturgically organize a training session, and that it sort of starts in this kind of softer way, but then it zones into this moment where the sort of high peak work is done. And I think you can, if you sort of aware of your performance as a coach and you sort of, train yourself to hold space in different ways, that you can get that moment where, they kind of get the violent trigger that they need to do the high performance. But then there's the line of retreat afterwards, the safe space to kind of go, yes, it's safe enough for us to go violent here. And then I'll give you a protein shake later and we'll just debrief, I mean, that's the point I'm at now with my kids, because I've got socioeconomic disadvantage, through the group, not totally, but, there's parts of it. And I'm looking for sponsors for, somebody to buy me like crates of Up and Go so that I can give them that nourishing post racing so they know I'll go there. And if nothing else, I'll get them Up and Go. I'm happy. So yeah, I think it's possible, but with a masterful person who's aware of, infecting performance. And that's really what I'll be doing with my mentorship. The final kind of project is me talking about how can we train those skills. A coach who's knowledgeable, whatever, but just to be aware of the performance and be in control of the performance. That way, the opportunities are endless and any client is possible to work with. Full stop.
David, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. It's been a fantastic discussion, and as you did allude to this, it probably could go for about 5 hours. So
yeah, I know.
We'll probably get you back on at some stage if you're happy to do that with us.
Yeah, maybe post the mentorship would be a good time.
Yeah, that'd be great.
After I've done the.
When does that finish for you?
We finish presentations in June, and then we get invited to Atlanta for the apprentice coach program.
Perfect. Yeah.
So, 6 months time or so, I'll be.
Fantastic, David.
Yeah. Thank you.
Dr. David Woods, thank you.
Thank you.